Hello everybody, welcome back to The Hobby Musician. We have got a great project for you today. It's something you can do either on an instrument you already own, or this can be an upgrade that you do to an instrument that you're thinking about buying, and as soon as you get it home, you can do this yourself. We're specifically talking about the guitar nut today. We spend a lot of time on this channel going over the ways that we as hobby musicians can really do our research and look into equipment and find great options of affordable gear, affordable instruments that may not be the big name brands, but they can still have all of the features we need to make the music that we want to make. But occasionally, we can't ignore the fact that there just sometimes are practical reasons why one instrument is so much cheaper than another. And today's focus is on that guitar nut. One of the common ways that manufacturers can kind of save some money is when they choose what materials they're going to use to make that specific piece on the guitar. Before we get started with the project itself, I just want to mention that, like all of our videos, any of the tools you see, the gauges and items that we use, I'm going to make sure to put some affiliate links down below so that if you want to try this yourself, you got quick and easy access to all the same stuff you see here. Well, this guitar nut, the material that it's made out of, can make a big difference when it comes to tuning. We all know that having an instrument that is in tune is kind of way up there on the list of priorities. And if a guitar has a nut that's kind of using a more affordable or a cheaper material like a low-grade plastic to hold the strings and allow the strings to kind of move up the neck and make it up to the tuning pegs, sometimes that material can be the root of tuning problems. If it's soft enough, sometimes the strings themselves can grip and catch in that nut, so that even if you're turning the pegs, you might be trying to get it in tune and it might be sticking and resisting you, and then all of a sudden it jumps a whole bunch and it moves out of tune again. So something as simple as that one piece on a guitar can, in some cases, make the difference between a guitar you love playing and a guitar that you just can't figure out what's driving you crazy. So we are going to replace that today. And the good news is you can do this at home very easily. The specific product that we're going to use today is one from a company called Graphtec. Now, they're not sponsors of this episode by any means. It's just these are the nuts I have personally bought and installed on my guitars for years now. And one of the cool things about these particular items is that this company has researched and developed kind of their proprietary blend of plastics and polymers and all kinds of stuff so that the material itself really mimics some of those old vintage high quality nuts, but because it's a polymer, it's a type of plastic, they're very affordable. And as you see, if you click the links below, these nuts are only like 11 or 12 bucks, and they do so much else. They kind of cut some of the slots in there for you so you don't have to worry about getting special saws and measuring that kind of stuff. So you just search for whatever model guitar you have, and they've got a pre-made nut that you can buy and swap into the guitar you have. So we're going to take a look at this guitar. This is a Tele style guitar, and it happens to be one that last season we bought and put together as a kit. And I'll put a link to the whole playlist there if you're interested in building it. But the nut that came with it was just a very affordable, inexpensive plastic nut. So the first step in this process is I'm going to loosen the strings. You might see some tutorials where they take the strings completely off, and that is fine. But one of the things that I'm thinking ahead, the very last step of this process is that I'm going to need to use the string. I want the string height to be able to kind of measure and gauge how high, the new nut is. So I'm actually going to leave the strings on. I'm going to loosen them, but I'll leave the strings on to use them in the very last step. So to get started with this, I'm gonna rework and move the camera around so you can get a close-up of what we're doing. So I'll be back in just a second. Okay, we've got our top-down view now. So to get started with this, like I was mentioning a minute ago, I've just loosened the strings because I want to keep them on to just kind of quickly put them back in when the process is over. So what I've done, as I said, I've loosened them enough that I can kind of just get them and move them out. So I'm going to take the three strings on one side and kind of move them off to that side, and I'll take the three strings, on the other side, so that we kind of now have easy access to this nut and the placement. Now, the first thing is I would recommend gathering up, first of all, a very sharp razor blade, maybe a new one, or if you have it in a holder, like a box cutter or something, a sharp razor blade, maybe some kind of needle nose pliers, and possibly a screwdriver. Depending on the exact model of your guitar, this particular one has the nut in a slot. This is actually in a slot cut into the wood, but some models of guitars have the nut at the very end of the fingerboard. So if you have it at the very end of the fingerboard, you might be dealing with a little bit more glue or fastener. So when I talk about very carefully using a razor blade to kind of go in and around, you want to effectively dig out or cut away the glue that's holding the piece on so that you can remove it. And this one, the reason you have like screwdrivers or needle nose pliers, if it's in a slot like this, I might need to push it. I might need to push it one way or the other to get it out of the slot, or it might raise right out of there. But as I mentioned, if your guitar has it at the very end, you might need to score and carefully cut away the glue, and you might need to take a block of wood and gently tap on it with a hammer or the end of end of pliers or something, because then you might be able to remove that last piece of glue. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch over to a time lapse because I'm going to very carefully take some passes at this, and you'll see in that time lapse that just little by little, I'm going to try to loosen this. I can already tell it's fairly loose, but there's some glue holding it. And then I want to remove that, and then we'll get on to preparing the new nut for that. So, all right, I'll be back in just a sec. Okay, we're back and we were successful. You can see that we got the old nut out, and as you kind of saw just a little bit in that time lapse, I had to spend more of the time working kind of around the edges. It seemed like when they put this in, they used a little bit more glue on either end, and there wasn't too much glue holding it in the middle. So it came out fairly easily, and now you can see what we were mentioning, that really what this was, they just took the fingerboard and cut a groove down into it so that the whole piece, the whole nut was kind of encased or sandwiched between this wood. But like we mentioned, some guitars have the nut at the very end. So on the other side, you may not have to dig it out. You may just have to work and release the glue on one side. Okay, so looking at our replacement, there's one thing I wanted to point out. When you, think about doing this yourself, you might get your replacement nut and look at it and visually say, wait a minute, this looks way thinner and it doesn't look like it's the right shape. And I just want to point out that although the old nut and a common way of doing this is to use a full chunk of material with a flat bottom, what this company has done, they have figured out that geometrically they have this post in the middle, and that post extends beyond the top. So you can actually, the edges follow the curvature of the neck, and this post allows the edge to middle to edge to still sit flat against the same kind of slot that this would come out of. So visually speaking, yes, they do look like they're different sizes, but functionally, they're going to operate the same. So we are ready to kind of do like a dry fit and get this new nut in there. And a couple tips for you is, remember, when you get this nut, if you look at it side on, you're going to notice that one side is very, very flat and the other side kind of rounds off. Well, keep in mind that the rounded off side is going to go towards the tuning pegs. You want that very flat side to be on the string side or the neck side, and the rounded off edge is going to go to the tuning pegs. The other thing that you're going to have to play with is, and as soon as I put this in here, I can tell the width of this groove and the width of my new nut are not exactly perfectly the same. So I'm already, there's a lot of kind of resistance going to this. So one thing that you're probably going to have to do is you're going to have to get yourself some sandpaper. And sandpaper, you can do a lot of adjustments with this. So one thing you can do, and what we're going to have to do, is I'm going to actually sand the sides and bring the new nut to make it just a touch narrower so it fits in this. However, other people might discover that their new replacement nut might be taller than the nut they took out. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to have a nice flat surface, lay your sandpaper down on it, and carefully sand the new nut down to match the height. Or you might have a situation where your new nut is too low and whatever you took out is much higher. In that case, you're going to have to get a very, very thin piece of wood to lay down in the bottom of the groove as a platform or as a shim to raise up the bottom so that your new nut can fit correctly. So that's what I'm going to do. This particular one, I just need to make it a tiny bit narrower so that it actually, because I can't even push it down in there, it won't go. So I'm going to make this a little narrower and get this pushed down in there, and then we're going to check the height to see if we're in the ballpark for this. So again, I'm going to switch over to a time lapse and I'll be back in just a second. All right, well, there you have it. We saw in that time lapse, I was going bit by bit and I would sand a little bit and then I would test it, and then it still didn't fit. So then I would sand a little bit and then test it. And that's really a tip that I have for you, is try not to do tons and tons of sanding and then go back, because you can always take material off, but it's much more difficult if you take too much off to go backwards. So I kept doing that back and forth, and I cleaned up the edges a little bit. You saw that one time I actually took the sandpaper and I cleaned up the edges of the groove because it felt a little bit kind of gritty when I went in there. But I finally got to the point where I was able to just snugly, now, and that's the key here, is we're not talking about something loose. I don't want this new nut to be as loose as the old one. So I just got it until I could push it in there and I can feel that new nut is going to be solid. Now, of course, when we get everything set, I am going to take a drop of glue and fix it in place permanently. But for the time being, I want it snug like this. So when you're doing this at home, the last step, you want to make sure that you got all of the heights right and that the strings going through your nut are at the right proper proportion when we look at the frets. So the reason I said at the beginning of the video, the reason I'm leaving the strings on, obviously they're super loose now, but what you can do when you have your new nut in and before you're completely done, before you've glued it down into place, the way that you're going to check this is you're going to want to use some sort of very kind of calibrated measuring device. Now, I personally, again, none of these companies are sponsors, but I personally use a Fret Guru because one of these things has so many measurements and easy to use gauges for things, as well as some people use sets of feeler gauges. And what I've got here, I'll put the image up here, but this company, Graphtec, actually recommends very specific measurements when it comes to the height of a string over a fret. So you've put in your new nut and now you're going to tighten up, and I haven't tightened these yet, but I just want to demonstrate what I'm going to do. We'll tighten these up, and then the company recommends that on the high E string, the thinnest string you have, there should be a 0.006 gap, width of a gap. When you press down on the 3rd fret, what the gap should be underneath the string, according to that, on that 1st fret, that's what you should expect. Then you know you have the height right. Then for the thickest string, the low E string, they recommend a 0.01 inch gap. And so that's what this different, all of these are very carefully machined to have the thickness that are stamped on there. So this gold looking one is the 0.01. So you would hold down with one finger, you would hold down the string at the 3rd fret, and then you would just slide the feeler gauge underneath, and you would want to have that clearance, no more, no less, but that much clearance between the string and that 1st fret. Then you know that each of the grooves in your new nut is set correctly. It's at the correct proper height for your playing. So that's it. Once you have that, you can then say, hey, I've got everything done. So if you're ready for that and you've got the height and everything right, you take the strings back out, you put a dollop of glue underneath the nut and you put it in, and now it's permanent. You can string everything back up and you are ready to go. So as I just described, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tighten these strings up, check my gaps, and honestly, even just from the personal experience of doing this before and seeing where the strings are now compared to where they were before, I've got high hopes for this. So I'm going to do all that checking, and then we'll come back and wrap up this video just in a minute. Well, everybody, there you have it. We're officially done. I got the strings all tightened up and checked those gaps just the way we described. And as expected, they came out to be just the right height, just what the company recommends. So hopefully you got something out of this episode, and hopefully now you can try this really simple, really inexpensive upgrade to one of your own instruments and see the benefits of some of that improved tuning stability. Well, thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, play on, my friends, play on.